I've seen elements of it, but it's good to kind of have that full overview. And there's some comments that other people, I think there's lots of different frameworks out there, and it's kind of how do you best utilize them, I think. But yeah, as Jazz said, if anyone's got any questions, if you want to put your hand up or pop them in the chat, or even a comment, not a question. We've got Maria.
Thank you. Really useful presentation. I'm well versed with the London Healthy Workplace Award, and I've come working from Havering and Newham Council, and we were working towards excellence last year. I've actually moved on. I now work for the NHS in the care sector. And I know we're going to go on to challenges, because let me tell you, I've got some with connecting with a very remote workforce who are frontline. I think there was a little back in about October, November, I did attend a meeting, a virtual meeting at County Hall, you know, with the lead there, Matt Creamer, I think his name is. Yeah. There was some confusion around the award and the Good Work Standard in terms of the bit around fair pay and conditions. What they've done is actually watered down the wellbeing side of it, and there was a lot of focus around fair pay. And what the hiccup was for some of it was we all got a bit caught out that actually to get the fair pay bit of it, you have to register with the Living Wage organisation to satisfy that. And then there was some confusion whether it should be London Living Wage. And when we think in this room, we've got Essex, which I live in Essex, we've got Warwickshire. So it really was, the devil was in the detail around how you were submitting your information. And we used to go up to the county hall and there would be award ceremonies, and I don't think they're doing that anymore. So I think there could be some more clarity from County Hall in terms of how that works, because if you're going down that route and doing all of that work, you want to make sure that you get the reward at the end, if you like, the recognition at the end. So just that little caveat around the living wage stuff, it is a separate application for that. Yeah. I hope that helps.
That's really helpful. And it's actually because I didn't want to start off with this, but there's been a lot of changes with the award. So I try and think of it as two things, as the award and as the framework. So the award itself, that is one of the benefits, is having that celebration of having an award, having that recognition. But the framework itself still can be used as an evidence base. And even within their sort of if you look at their guidance, in the guidance, it has a paragraph saying you don't need to apply for the award. So I try and that's how I try and look at it, because they no longer actually do. The mayor is completely focused on the Good Work Standard and not the Healthy Workplace Award as such. So that's not happening at the moment. For whatever reason. And as you know, you were there. I also was there was a lot of changes happening. But one of the good things, before all of that had happened, because you spoke about remote working as well, when that did happen, before all of that happening, Affinity of Health, who are commissioned to do the evidence base around the framework itself, had looked at the framework in relation to the pandemic and looked at whether it was still fit for purpose. And a lot of the criteria were quite fit for purpose. They made a few tweaks in terms of remote working and things like that. And so it's relevant now as well. So that's really, really, I'm glad that the review happened before all of the changes happened to the award scheme.
Thanks, Nadal. That was so helpful. We looked at this at Surrey, actually. We're designing one in-house now, but we were definitely looking at using the framework. What we weren't really sure of were sort of timescales of getting it rolled out. We had around 12,000 staff, and also the team. Do you have any insights into what size of team you'd expect to work on this sort of framework rolling out, and how long what would be a realistic timescale?
So for us, when we first started as an organisation, we created like a working group, a health and wellbeing working group, and it was chaired by the Director of Public Health. And the reason for that was to try and get that championing happening. And it consisted of occupational health, and then it had a representative from all the directorates. And they met quarterly with the intention of gaining the award. But the main bulk of the work was done by public health and occupational health working together. That was how it was structured in our organisation. And for each of the levels, it is quite a lot of work. The first step is the mapping and seeing, and if you haven't got things, so for example, if there is a specific policy that you currently don't have, and by doing the mapping you've realized, oh, we haven't even thought about this, then you've got to create the policy. And of course that has its own governance structure depending on your organization, so you might have to take it to, whether it's a senior management team meeting, get it approved, get through that process, and then you've got that policy in place, and you can say, yeah, I take that criteria off. So there's quite a lot of steps that you've got to kind of get through. So I would say, be realistic with the timescales. You would need at least minimum a year, if not a bit longer, maybe 18 months. But it's a process. So as you're doing things, you should be seeing outcomes as you're doing it, because of course that's the process of the framework. It's not just, it shouldn't be a tick box exercise. It's there for a purpose. You're doing it to try and get that outcome of increasing well-being of employees. So I hope that answers your question.
Tina.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, thank you. I was just going to say that's really useful. And one thing that came to mind when you were talking about this framework, we just actually did a bit of a trial for the PPMA recently we were trialing them. I think they're developing an STF framework, so Striving, Thriving and Flourishing framework. And we've been recently involved in a trial. Yes, it's a lot of work. So I was nodding my head when you're saying it's a lot of work, but we actually did this in a real short space of time. This framework really allowed us to kind of look at our existing offer, to identify any gaps, and we had a sort of a workshop last week with all the departmental representatives, etc. So I'm just sort of nodding along going, I'm really pro framework. The work cannot be underestimated, and we need the resources to do something like this. But it's really interesting listening to you with this sort of framework is a lot more in depth than what we've just completed. So like I said, we looked at our existing offer, looked at where our gaps were, what we needed to do to move forward, etc., etc. That's been really, really helpful. But I think what you've got within this sort of the Good Standard Work framework is that mapping in terms of where do we want to get to, and it's almost like a bit of a timeline, hasn't it? And I think that's really useful. So yeah, no, thank you for that. It's really something for us to consider for the future, not immediate future, but yeah, something for us to definitely consider for the future. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And we're actually considering to create a local award within our boroughs for external organisations. So now that the London Healthy Workplace Award is not there, using the framework, but calling it a local Healthy Workplace Award, and have that recognition locally. So I don't know if that's something other people might be considering, but that's why it can be relevant to whichever area you're in, because you could develop, adapt it.
Darren, go ahead.
Hi, yes, good morning. Yeah, for me, I'm just nodding, similar to Tina, because it's everything is falling into line as to where we are as well at East Riding Yorkshire Council. So we recently, 2 years ago, but myself came into this position, but we also had a new head of service in HR, which brought a brand new steer to what we were trying to do. And we actually have an internal, we call it the Better Health at Work Award that we have. Now we're looking to merge everything together. We're across 5 directorates, about 13,000 members of staff, and it includes the state schools as well. So we're working with creating active schools. So the project is significant. We are commissioned by Public Health as well, so we do work within the Public Health Wellbeing at Work. But it's just a thank you really to reassure me that we are going in the right way in terms of our internal one that we've done. But secondly, the external options that we've got as well, and how we can look at that framework together to confirm. You know, you mentioned there about different awards. We run like a bronze, a silver, a gold, and a director's award, which is internal. But up to 18 months ago, it was very health and safety driven rather than health and wellbeing. So we've taken the safety element as a second option and actually umbrellaed it under a wellbeing offer, to now call it Better Health at Work. So it's really allowed us, and it's just affirmation that we're going in the right direction with it, which is really reassuring. And we likewise have a workforce wellbeing group as well. We meet monthly, and ours is actually chaired by organisational development, but we have union representation, HR, recruitment, myself, public health there as well, schools as well. So it's a really proactive working group. But just thank you for confirming that we are going in the right direction. But equally, there are other bits that we can look at to adapt with as well. So thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. That's really helpful to hear as well, like to hear about, you know, how you're doing it with the organisation, and it's really helpful. Thank you, Darren.
Any other questions?
Was there anything you wanted to show, for me to show in detail? Because I did kind of just show snapshots. Would it be helpful for anyone to see anything in detail? Because I could pull it up if that's helpful.
It's a bit useful just to see more around the different elements of the framework. Yeah, I don't know if that might be useful for others to see, because it's not something I've ever seen in detail. So.
Yeah, sure thing. 1 second. So like the sorry. Trying to bring it up. I did have it all opened and prepared just in case, but then
Always the tech is slower than our
it's not like when you have papers or like you're in person and you're like, and there's this thing here. Yeah, I don't know where I've put it, but I will share the links so that it's easy for everybody to kind of have a look in their own time.
Great. And we did share, they did go up higher in the chat, but just around the Good Work Standard, shared the link for that as well. So
yeah, I will do.
Lovely. I don't know if anyone else had anything else that they wanted to draw on a bit more. So you've got Nadal sharing her time. Seeing some comments in the chat. Oh, sorry, Liz.
Sorry, I was just going to say, sorry, it was a little bit not working out the accountability, but we had a wellbeing team and we had public health. And so we were just working out, how do we work together? Who does what? Have you got any thoughts on that when you've got public health and a wellbeing team, and sort of tips on, how
It's quite difficult actually, because I think every public health team will work differently. So some are very focused around policy and strategy and kind of being the experts, kind of giving that evidence base, but then not doing the doing, I suppose. And in some areas, you've got quite a big public health team that have, like, within their team, they've got in-house, like with smoking cessation and things like that, and they're quite sort of active. So it's really dependent on the organisation. But what I try to always remember, that we all have the same sort of objective, and that's what's important. And when you work from that sort of stance, then you can kind of work how to work together. But it can be quite difficult in terms of not just how an organisation works, but the culture, and then also politically, what all of that means. So in some terms, public health things have changed with the pandemic, but often we're like not really the public facing team within a council, and it would be like parks and the parks team, for example, doing the things around green spaces and things, but in the background you had public health giving that kind of evidence base of what to do. So it really depends on that. But my highlight would be, my end is the aim and the objectives are the same, so I go with that. I think Patrick's got his hand up.
Yeah, hi. Just along. So I work for Norfolk County Council, occupational health and wellbeing. So just thinking about that tie-in with public health, because there was always this tension when they moved into Norfolk County Council. Those who remember it, when it moved over, I don't know how many, 10 years ago, maybe. Anyway,
Yeah.
One of the things I suppose what I've always wanted to do from a wellbeing point of view is that we work as an organisation, we're exemplars of public health behaviour, and that we're also that our staff understand and know what public health provide to the residents of Norfolk, so they can act as a conduit, as a champion for it. So along those, as an example, an employee might say, well, I had an NHS health check at work, for example. We were providing those prior to the pandemic, but they can tell that if they're in children's service, so they might tell a parent or a grandparent that these are available. I had it; it was really great, and it might, like I say, encourage that they go out in the community to promote it. But we work quite closely with public health on a Healthy County Council initiative, which is sort of it's run its time, but we're working on other ones as well.
Thanks, Patrick. That reminds me of making every contact count as well. The MEC, yeah, and
that's something we're also making every contact count, and it was along that, it was actually, that was what I had in mind when we said about promoting it to employees, along those lines. But thank you, Nadal.
No, thanks, Patrick, for sharing. That's really helpful. I wanted to ask if what people do in terms of outcomes, because that's something that is often, because the framework talks about things and actions. How do you have any of you got any sort of thoughts? Have you looked at at outcomes? How have you done it? And if not, is that something, equally that's useful to know as well? That's something that's not really being explored as much as you'd like. Yes, Patrick.
Probably need to put my camera on instead of sitting here silently. So that's been a constant tension for me. And it was mentioned earlier, do you measure the things you've done? Well, so what? You've done all that stuff. We've got 8,500 employees. I feel really conscious that that when you say, look at all this great stuff we've done, but there'd be potentially swathes of that population going, I don't know who you are. Who are the wellbeing team? What have you ever done for me? I'm stuck out in if anyone knows Norfolk, the third largest county, so I'm stuck out here in the west, in the Fenland, and nobody came and saw me or cared about me. So there's always a tension there. So what we've tried to move towards, and again, we still haven't got it coordinated, is trying to get some sort of qualitative measures of the impact. So what difference did it make to your attendance at work, which is an obvious one, your productivity, which is always a difficult one because it's subjective, your relationships with your colleagues. So that's one option. But there's I think it's a workplace health and wellbeing scale, which is a measure that's used. I think that's what it's called. I have to double check. But we've also for example, our EAP uses something called Core 10, or there's also various versions of this, which is more about psychological treatment. So we're seeing whether that can be applied to something that's more well-being. But ideally, it's difficult to pull one thing that will work across from those proactive well-being measures to those reactive well-being measures, and that you can use a single scale to measure it all. But that is what I would hope for. But I think those the scales, but also personal stories carry a lot of weight. When we're doing our annual report, I always try to put some sort of feedback from an individual that gives that sort of more emotive this changed my life. I was going to leave the organisation, but the support I received actually made me think what I wanted to do within the organisation, and it's made me a different person, because most of the work that the council do is qualitative. When you think about social care, a lot of that is qualitative sort of stuff. Even I say even libraries and cultural, for example, that's qualitative. You can go in and there's the librarian goes, the books are over there, or whatever it might be. But if they're engaged and positive, it gives people a different experience.